And on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, I'm here to welcome you to a discussion with our nominees for Best First Novel by an American Author. Before we begin, a few notes. There will be a link posted to the chat with all of the panelists' books. Please support our local our bookseller. Books today are being provided by Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. Throughout the conversation, you can submit questions in the chat and Q&A boxes, and they'll be answered at the end. You can watch the Edgar Awards live streamed on our YouTube channel on April 28th. Please follow us on social at #Edgars2022, and you can find the calendar of upcoming Edgar panels on our website at mysterywriters.org or theedgars.com. And now I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for this evening, Allison Brennan. Allison Brennan is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling and award-winning author of more than 40 books and numerous short stories. She believes life is too short to be bored, so she had 5 children, all of whom we have been assured are still alive, and writes 3 books a year. She currently lives in Arizona with her husband, her 2 youngest children, and assorted pets, including their newest creature, a bearded dragon. When not writing or reading, she enjoys hiking and baseball. For more information about Allison and her upcoming release, The Wrong Victim, visit her website at AllisonBrennan.com. Take it away, Allison.
Thank you so much for asking me to host this. I was so thrilled. I love Best First Novel. It is my favorite category to judge. It's my favorite category to read. I always try to read debut novels because to me, there's a certain passion in the book because it is the first book. And even though my first book was many years ago, and I have recently reread it and cringed at several parts of it, thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or why didn't I do that? It still has such a warm place in my heart. And I think that you all being nominated for such a major award must be doubly thrilled, because your book probably won't have those cringe moments in 15 years when you reread it. So I'm going to introduce everybody, and then I just have a few questions. I like to, based on what you guys say on your answers, I might have different questions because I think that's more fun rather than having like a list of the questions. Okay, what is your favorite color? So I'm going to read the bios very quickly, and then we will go in and I'll have questions for each of you. Okay, Erin Flanagan. Erin, raise your hand just so everybody can see you. Erin Flanagan's novel Blackout is forthcoming in fall of 2022 from Thomas & Mercer. She is the author of the novel Deer Season and 2 short story collections, The Usual Mistakes and It's Not Going to Kill You and Other Stories, all published by the University of Nebraska Press in their Flyover fiction series. She is an English professor at Wright State University, where she likes all of her colleagues except one. I love that. Okay. Vera Kurian is a writer and scientist based in Washington, D.C. There's Vera. Her debut novel, Never Saw Me Coming, was published by Park Row Books and Harvill Secker Vintage in the UK in September of 2021. She has a PhD in social psychology, where she studied intergroup relations, ideology, and quantitative methods. See, already you guys are so much smarter than me. Wow. Okay. Fabian Nachessa. Did I get it close?
Really off. Really good job, Allison.
Necessia.
Necessia, just like it's spelled.
Is a comic book writer and editor who is best known as the co-creator of Marvel's Deadpool and for writing X-Men, X-Force, New Warriors, and Robin. He has worked on franchise development for Hollywood studios, video game and toy companies, and developed the children's animated series, Stan Lee's Superhero Kindergarten. His book, which he didn't list in his bio, that was nominated for the Edgar, is Suburban Dicks. Okay, Joanne Tompkins. Joanne, raise your hand. Joanne Tompkins' first career as a trial lawyer, judicial officer, and mediator immersed her in lives disrupted by conflict, injury, and far too often violence and abuse. Yet she discovered in many a resilience that continues to move her. Her written work explores the possibilities of forgiveness and reconnection with life, love, and community in the aftermath of tragedy. She lives in Port Townsend, Washington with her husband and puppy. Her book that was nominated is called What Comes After. And then Caitlin, raise your hand. The last one, last but not least, it's in alphabetical order. So born to two hippies in a small town in Maine, Caitlin Ware left the state for college, but returned to attend law school and practice law, where she worked on cases involving some of the broad issues she writes about in The Damage. She lives in Southern Maine with her husband. The Damage is her debut novel. Okay, first of all, I've read all these books. These are all great, and everybody should always go out whenever the Edgars announce the nominees and get all of the nominations, because I think that you would all agree they're well worth your time to read. And I often will use either the Edgars or the thrillers, or even, you know, the romance writers when they still had an award, to say, okay, those are the books I got to read this year because a large group of people like them, people that I trust. So I'm just going to give my 2 cents that I think every single one of these books is definitely worth the time that I spent judging the Edgars. So we're going to start, since I started alphabetically at the top, we're going to go to the bottom, and I'm going to ask Caitlin, one of the things I really, really loved about The Damage was, actually, all the books had great characters, but one of the things that I loved was the complexity of the relationship between Julia and Tony, Julia and Nick, who was the victim, and Tony and Nick, his half-brother. I really felt that the way that you, so I always try not to give spoilers, so if I ask these questions awkwardly, that's why. It's like I'm going, okay, what part of the book does that come in? But the way that you conveyed the family, how much they love each other and fear for each other, and the trauma that happened was so compelling in this story. Why don't you talk a little bit about your character development and how you kind of put this family unit together, and why you did it in such a way?
Yeah. In part, it is based on some of my like dynamics with my own family and with my husband's family, but they're completely like ultimately fake characters. But I actually have an older half sister, so the two brothers in the book are 17 years apart in age, and the one who's married to the woman Julia, he's the older brother, and so the dynamics between him and his younger brother are in certain really small ways similar to my older sister and I. And then also I have seen my own husband have just like this really beautiful relationship with all of his siblings, at moments like fiercely protective, but also really goofy and playful, and honestly like a lot warmer than sometimes men are portrayed as being in fiction with like other men in their family. And so I was definitely drawing on some of that when I crafted that part of the characters. And then the idea for the story ultimately really was about the husband and wife. And so even though I had this plot idea that was spanning after a sexual assault has happened, it was something that always was about the relationships. Like from the very beginning of the story idea for me, they were just really important. And so I think that it was just kind of working it over and over again in my head, almost like a what would you do kind of situation. What would I do if this was happening? What would this person do? And then they kind of molded into different people ultimately, because I did want it to be fiction. And I think that what the characters in the book do is maybe more exciting than what would have happened in real life. And so I think that's ultimately like where it went. But it was definitely drawn on real life in certain ways. And it was very much coming from like a place of love for me, loving those people in my life and loving the way that I see them act toward me, them act toward each other. And so, yeah, I think that's really why the characters resonate for some readers.
Well, they were very, very authentic. And I will say that the ending was wholly satisfying. That's all I'm going to say about the ending, that I was wholly satisfied with the ending. And I don't say that about all books, but I definitely was with this one. Joanne, well, okay, like I said, one of the things about all of these nominations was that the characters were all so unique and well drawn. And I think one of the Isaac in What Comes After was such a quietly moving character, and what he had to, what he endured, what he basically quietly endured. And what I really kind of enjoyed was the way you incorporated his faith, because it wasn't necessarily a common faith. I mean, being a Quaker isn't as common today as, being a Christian or being a Muslim or being anything. I mean, it's like it was a very unique and kind of a moving way, the way he used that as kind of his foundation. Can you talk a little bit about Isaac and also Rufus? Because obviously everybody loves the dog. I mean, I'm a dog and a cat person, but I love the bond that he had with his pet and how that kind of added to his character. So tell us a little bit of what he's facing so that readers understand where we encounter him at the beginning of the book.
Well, and this is no reveal because it's in the first page and a half of my book, but his son is murdered by a longtime close friend of his son that he considered like a second son. So he's had this sort of double betrayal. And that second boy who murdered his son committed suicide a week later. So this is the turmoil that the town is thrown into. And the question is why and how and what are all the dynamics that are much more spread out almost over a lifetime in terms of how this happened. And I was really interested because though I am not Quaker, I did spend a month with them at a Quaker residential and learning facility and spent years in spiritual listening group. And I'm just so moved by the Quakers and their very quiet approach to this. And I really wondered, because the case itself is inspired by a case I handled when I was a mediator as a retired judge. And it was different, but it was a murder of a teenage boy by two other teenage boys. And there was just so much grace in the aftermath of that particular horrendous act that I thought if I put this man with this Quaker faith that had used his faith, as I think can happen in almost any true and beautiful belief, it can sometimes be used wrongly and to detriment and to closing off people. And so one of the struggles through the book is that Isaac must decide if he can reopen himself both to his religious community and more, as importantly, to his this girl that appears in his life and his neighbor that is the mother of the killer of his son. So to me, I was interested. I thought, what will that be like to explore a faith that is so oriented to peacefulness, to nonviolence, being confronted with something so violent and such a betrayal at so many different levels. So that was and he was just somebody that very much was based on a person I met in my time at Pendle Hill in Philadelphia, or just outside of Philadelphia. And I just knew I had to write about him. And then, of course, Rufus, who is the dog of the murdered boy and of Isaac, is quite a character. And he came to be because I had tried years back to write a memoir of my own dog that this dog is based on. And that memoir was bad. And so when I was writing this book.
You're muted.
I always wanted to write. Oh, am I better? Okay. I always had wanted to write about my dog. And I thought of teenage boys in a small rural town would definitely have a dog. And Rufus is, I personally think of him as a type of bodhisattva, an enlightened being in the form of a dog that somehow has some darkness and light in him, as all my characters do, but does manage to be a source of compassion throughout and a mirror for what maybe can model what these humans should maybe be doing in the aftermath.
I love when animals are well portrayed, because we have a black lab, and I can totally see how that, because he can sense my husband's moods. If my husband's in a playful mood, he'll get him to go out and play ball. If he's like in a depressed mood, he'll just lie down next to him quietly and just be there for him, you know, and I just think it's, I do think that there's a bond sometimes with pets. So I love when people incorporate pets into the story in a organic way that makes sense to the book, which I think that you did absolutely wonderfully. That's why I had to ask about Rufus. You know?
Joanne, I just want to say too, that must be so satisfying that readers have responded to the dog. Like, it'd be one thing if I'm like, oh, this is based on my sister, but like my dog, I would be like, that for some reason seems like it'd be all the more touching. Like, thank you for loving my dog.
Yes, it is really true. I have to say that one of the great joys of writing the book was writing the Rufus character, and it made him kind of alive for me again. He's been dead almost a decade now, but he was just a very special being. So yes, to have other people respond to him like that, you're right. I really, Erin, that's exactly how it is. It's very rewarding.
Fabian, which I'm not going to butcher your last name again. Okay, so
it's really not that hard.
I know. I'm bad. Okay, I have to ask this because you are the one with the most unique writing history, and the fact that you came from comics. I mean, everybody here is a lot smarter than I am because I'm a college dropout. So they have a very, you too?
Oh yeah.
But so I have to ask you this because I'm sure this is what readers are going to be interested in. Why did you write this book? Why did you move from comics to, well, I mean, your book is humorous and, you know, it's a little dark and it's irreverent and it's a lot like a comic in, I guess, long form, but why did you make this move?
The actual question is really, why did it take me so damn long to try to do it and to be satisfied with what I did? That's really the question. I've always tried to write prose. I just never liked what I wrote. This book's gestation is over 25 years in the making. The original idea, the title, the characters, pretty much everything. The whole structure of the book was put together in my brain in 1995, 96. And just never was satisfied with any of my attempts to write prose. And I was a professional writer with bills to pay, so that meant assignments that had deadlines and that were paying took priority. But around 2017, the best motivators that usually fuel me, which is anger and jealousy, came to the fore because I saw a lot of contemporaries of mine starting to get novels published. And I just said to myself, if I don't try to finish a book now, I probably never will. I turned 60 the year the book was published. And that, so I started writing it in late 2017, and kept going and got positive feedback from people who were looking at it. So I just kept writing it as a side thing for probably almost a year and a half. Never really honestly expecting to sell it. Never really honestly having a clue whether it was good or bad or indifferent. So when I got an agent to express interest in representing it, and when we had publishers interested in getting the manuscript, it was a bit of a surprise, quite a roller coaster. But I've been a writer for 35 years, and I've worked on multiple platforms during all of that time. So I might be best known as a comic book writer, but I've been doing all different kinds of writing. The same year my book was published, you mentioned a children's animated series debuted on a streaming app that I'd worked on a few years earlier with Stan Lee before he passed away. And that's aimed at 4 and 5-year-old kids. So my career has always been a little bit kooky in that I've tried purposefully to do a lot of different things. And writing a prose novel really was just as much for personal satisfaction of finishing it, never expecting it to get published, much less this. But just hearing the accomplishments and the experiences of everyone surrounding me in this Brady Bunch screen I'm looking at, I feel incredibly small for the 35 years I've spent doing what I've done.
No, you shouldn't. And actually, you're going to be the poster child for perseverance. Because when I go out and speak to aspiring writers, I say, if you love it, you will continue to do it, even if you're rejected. because we've all been rejected. I'm sure you've been rejected. I mean, the Hollywood business is not
and
kind and
Hollywood and
friendly.
in comic stuff, I've been rejected a lot. It's ironic that my first novel wasn't rejected. But I did tinker on something last year that did kind of get rejected. So there's that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I do want to talk a little bit about the book and about the content of the book. Your character, Andy, is a pregnant mom of 4. Meaning she has 4 kids, and you're the only guy here. I'm sorry. I am a mom of 5, so I can actually speak to being a mom of 5. So do you have kids? Did you tap into that?
I have 2 adult children who weren't even born. Only one of them was born when I had the original idea for the book. But the truth is, when I had the original idea for the book, it was at a time in our lives when all of us had just gotten married a couple years earlier. All of our peer groups, our friends, all of us were starting to have our first kids. The character of Andy is very loosely based, physically based, but personality-wise, very loosely based on a friend of mine. And she was the first of our group to get pregnant. And her son's like a year older than my daughter is. So the original idea really was making her pregnant and having that many kids was 2 different reasons, but making her pregnant was really a reflection of what I was going through in my life, not personally, you know what I mean, at the time that I came up with the concept. And I just thought it made for an interesting character quirk, interesting conflict for her, both interpersonal and intrapersonal, for her to have to be doing the things she was doing while pregnant, again, and unlike other parents, I can't speak to anybody's individual experiences, but she's in a situation where she's not necessarily thrilled about having a 5th kid.
Right. Well, she also, I found her unique in that I think she is relatable. A lot of women can relate to her because I love being a mom, but I also love my job. And I think you can love both and then feel guilty about loving both. I think that actually came through, that she loved her kids and she wanted her kids. Maybe the 5th one was a whoops, but at the same time, she also missed her career and she wanted the career. So juggling that in that balance is difficult for anyone, but especially, a working mom or a mom that decides to stay home, which I did for 3 years, and I don't understand why, because I never got anything done. I said, oh, I can watch my kids. They will sit there so good and watch TV and entertain themselves. I had 2 kids were in school and 3 little kids. And I will sit there and write because I'm a writer now. I'd already sold my first book and I'm a writer. I got nothing done. I had to wait until they went to bed before I could write. And by then I was exhausted. So I could actually relate to Andy a lot because of that, but also because of her the polarization, the love of both things and wanting it all and realizing maybe you can't have it all at the same time. So I really did like that. And I was actually impressed because not all male authors can effectively portray female authors. I don't mean to sound sexist there. It's in my knowledge, in my world, I've learned that.
In truth, the time it took me to actually write the book ended up being to its benefit, I believe, because the problems all of my friends were going through when they all were getting pregnant is every single one of them were, college educated, graduate degrees, careers already underway in their late 20s. And it was an absolute struggle for every one of them to decide, how do I juggle having a kid and having a career? And taking 25 years to write it, I've watched all of us go through the process now where adult husbands, wives have to consider and reflect on the choices that were made, 20 years ago, for good and bad, for positive and negative. I'm not much of a binary kind of a guy in the way I think. I think everything's a pretty complicated morass of gray. So I don't think there's ever an easy answer. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. But I've gotten to watch and participate in the conflict that all women have to go through in our society between work and career, in quotation marks, as being binary choices.
Well, you did great, but I also want to point out Suburban Dicks is a mystery, and it is a really good mystery. And I loved the complexity of, and I don't want to give anything away, but the way that the mystery unfolded and all the little clues that were layered in was very, very well done. So we talked a lot about Andy as a character because she's unique in compared to all the other characters we're talking about, but it's also the book is you put her in a good mystery. So yay. Kudos.
I want to say, Fabian, like, I can't believe you said that's based on your friend when you talked about how big her ass got. Like that, if I was that friend, I would never come forward.
Yeah, she found out it was loosely based on her well after the fact. But the narrative voice is pretty much all the worst aspects of my brain that just gets funneled through their depiction of what the character is feeling. So I'm pretty lucky in that a lot of the responses have been very positive to the book, but the negative ones almost universally have complained about that aspect of it, the point of view regarding how her pregnancy is described and how her physical movements are described. But what I try to say, and I fail often in saying it properly, is that that's just the narrative voice reflecting how she feels about herself and how she feels about how she's presenting herself. She's just exhausted by all of it. But there's an imagery in the book which was coming out of a minivan like an egg yolk, and that literally did happen. So I have to be honest about that. That was something that happened in real time at the time, and that stuck with me forever. That imagery.
Well, no, and I totally got that from the book too. Like, it seems like the last thing you should have to be worried about when you're 9 months pregnant is the size of your ass. But when does many women not worry about it? So, like, no, I totally got that was her point of view.
Thanks. And this has been sitting in my brain for so long that I can tell you, 10, 15 years of her life. So what I'm writing in book 1, there's an advancement for her in book 2 that comes out this June. Might as well plug it now. The Self-Made Widow comes out in June. And there's an advancement in her character and her position. And if there's a third book, if I'm lucky enough, there's a third or a fourth, there's further advancement from where we see her now. So a lot of the criticisms, though perfectly valid if you have them, I took that into account trying to figure out where she was going in her life.
Great. Well, I'm glad that there's going to be a book 2. And so absolutely, I love the title. What a great title.
You. That's my editor, Mark Tavani's title. We could not come up with a title. It took us forever.
Yeah, I don't get to title my books either most of the time. Vera, with my sister publisher, Park Row Books. So your book, Never Saw Me Coming, is among all the stories, is probably one of the darkest, most psychological thrillers among this group. If anybody loves serial killer books, dark, twisty, this is the book you absolutely have to read. I think it was extremely well done. It was, when I say fun, I don't mean fun, laugh, ha-ha, like Suburban Dicks was fun and you could laugh out loud in that. I mean fun like, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening. I got to finish this book tonight. I mean, I think that's actually another unique with this group of nominees is that you didn't want to put the book down. And anybody's like, okay, I got to finish this book because I have to find out what happens. And I think Vera, with your book in particular, because it was so original and so fun, for me, because I do like dark thrillers. I literally read it in one night, and it's a pretty meaty book. So would you talk, I would like you to talk about a little bit, because the hook is so original, tell us the hook and how you kind of came up with that concept.
Mm-hmm. So Never Saw Me Coming is about Chloe, who is an 18-year-old incoming freshman. She is a diagnosed psychopath, and she's entering a special program at a university in DC where 7 undergraduate psychopaths can go to school for free for 4 years in exchange for being part of this program where they are, their brains are studied, but they also learn behavior modification. But she is really there to hunt down and kill a boy from her past who goes to that college. But what she doesn't know is that someone in town is hunting down the 7 psychopaths and killing them one by one. I think the idea came to me like really suddenly, but I think like what had kind of been stewing in the background is that I read a lot of psychological thrillers, and a lot of them are kind of about hapless women who like don't ask follow-up questions. And I find that really frustrating. I wanted to read about like, you know, a really intelligent, driven female character. So I wanted to write this like highly intelligent, manipulative, get stuff done type of character, and have a revenge plot. And then the school aspect of it came in when I had heard about, like years ago, I'd heard about a program in a juvenile detention facility where, you know, psychopaths don't have a conscience. So it's kind of hard to get them to change their behavior because the incentives are hard. So they incentivize positive behavior by giving them rewards for positive behavior rather than being like, this is morally wrong. So the program at the school is kind of designed around that. And then I just threw in a lot of aspects from the field of psychology, which I'm quite familiar with.
Well, one of the things that I don't want to call it a slow burn because I think that doesn't quite do it justice, but the way that you incorporated the atmosphere with her, Chloe, and I almost said Andy because I'm getting all my books confused. With Chloe's, you're right, she's an extremely intelligent, but the way that you incorporated the atmosphere with her mentality, with her, the way that she viewed the world, and the way that she viewed, and when she actually started to become to the realization of what was going on, it was very eye-opening for me because, like I said, it was a book that I could not put down, so I read it really, really fast. How do you, in your process, layer in that kind of complexity at the beginning of the story so that it all comes out at the end? And I'm asking this because obviously I want to know, because sometimes that is one of the hardest things to do with writing is where you're layering in. Did you know from the very beginning? Because again, I don't want to give anything away. Did you know from the very beginning, say, who the killer was? Did you know what was going to happen? And did you have that all layered in, or did you say at the very end, oh, now I know, and now I got to go back and layer in all of these little details?
Yeah, so I'm an extreme plotter. If you look on my blog, you can find an old Facebook post where from 2018 where I posted something like, I have an idea for a book that's about a school of 7 psychopaths, and I like basically outlined the entire book, including who did it. So I knew who did it like before I started writing it. For the character stuff, it's like I do a lot of thinking and designing the character so that when I'm writing the character, it's like almost kind of like method acting of like, I know that the way that they even perceive walking into a room is different per each character. So the book is really voicey, like when it's in Chloe's POV. So I kind of, and also because she's smart, right? The problem with like when you really like your wonderful characters is that you don't want to make them flawed. But one of her major flaws is that she's just like utterly has no humility whatsoever, which means she sometimes doesn't see things that she should. And the other thing that was the one thing that I had to kind of like work on was how do you write a thriller with the majority of characters not being capable of feeling fear? And that was actually why Andre is so critical. Andre, this isn't a spoiler. Andre is a character who's pretending to be a psychopath, but is not. So he's like an important foil for the other characters who sees things closer to how we would see them. That was something I had to like try a little harder to get right.
Well, you did a very good job getting it right. I think that the book is, it's a little darker than the other books that were nominated in terms of just the subject matter. But I think that's why I liked it so much, because it's very hard to do well. And I really enjoyed it. Okay, I want to remind everybody before I talk to Erin, please, if you have any questions, type it into the Q&A, and so that I can ask these authors anything that you want. I'm sure that they would be willing to answer any question you have within reason. But please do type in your questions if you want to know about either the book themselves or maybe their writing process or anything about their background or what's coming up next. Erin, last but not least. Now, dear Season, I couldn't help but when I started this book is that there was a bit of nostalgia because obviously I was born in 1969. So I grew up in the 80s and I could really, and maybe that's one of the reasons I love this book so much is that I could really feel the characters. I felt like I was there. It was like that sense of nostalgia. It's why I love Stranger Things, because I go there like, I had that bicycle. I know what this, I know what that game is. So it really resonated. I actually have a couple questions for you, but the first is, why did you decide to set the book in the 80s? I mean, it's not historic per se, because they don't really consider it historical fiction, but what about that time period resonated for you?
Well, I grew up in a town very similar to Guntram about that time. I would have been close to Milo's age in 1985. He's the 12-year-old boy in the book. And part of it's a failure of imagination, in that I almost can't imagine the rural town that I grew up in, what that might look like today. It's very similar to that. And I'm like, oh no, they have cell phones. They have Amazon Prime. Like they have outlets to the rest of the world. But like when I was there, it was so insular. Like if we wanted to go shopping for school clothes, we had to go like an hour and a half away to get to a Gap. And like, that was the big town, you know? So like, I wanted to really capture that rural feel of, this is the community, everybody in the community is related, and that there's not a lot of ways to imagine the world outside of that, not in quite the way there is now. Like when I was a kid, I didn't really watch the news very often, unless, you know, it was on around MASH, and then we'd watch it, and then, or read the paper. So like, I didn't have a sense of how the world worked as much as I might have if I was in a small town, or as much as I might if I was in a small town now. So part of it was it was nostalgia too. Like I wanted to capture what it was like to grow up in that town in a way that I hoped would, you know, show that small town life is as complicated as any other life that you might live.
Well, I mean, I didn't grow up in a small town, but outside of major city. So, but I do understand the thing about where you know everybody, because you ride your bike everywhere, and it's something that's kind of lost, I think, on my kids. You know, they can't. I lived out in the country when I lived in California. They couldn't ride their bike everywhere. So I really loved that. That sense of going back into time, and obviously was done extremely well. You mentioned Milo, which was going to be my other question, was again about characters, because I think people, especially mystery readers, mysteries, because we read so many of them, it's sometimes easy to figure out what's going on, but what keeps us reading is the characters, and we have to find out what happens to them. And Milo resonated with me just because he was so authentic. And even though it's not a coming of age story, it's obviously a mystery. It's his sister who goes missing at the beginning of the book. I'm not giving anything away there. That's like the mystery. That's the mystery that needs to be solved. But the way that you portrayed him was so authentic. And in a sense, he was a kind of a coming of age story. Did you have that planned out from the beginning, that he was going to be such a well-liked and pivotal character?
Thank you. I didn't really know what his arc was going to be in the book when I started it. It was kind of just trial and error and trying to figure him out. But he was based kind of on me, again, gosh, failure of the imagination maybe. And what I think my husband must have been like at that time. He was, you know, a pretty sensitive kid, and he, you know, wasn't into sports, and like, but was a tough little kid. But he had some things working against him in the social order of things. And I grew up with my sister, was and is like gorgeous and athletic and smart, and I came along and I was a little more awkward. And so I think growing up in her shadow kind of like helped me think about who Milo might be, and like, how do you form your own path in such a small town when like every class I enter, oh, you must be Kelly's sister. Looking forward to seeing what you do. And I'd be like, oh boy, you're going to be disappointed. So I think that was part of how I got to Milo, but I hadn't really thought so much about the arc. But I did have a sense of like, here's what I think this kid needs.
Well, I really, and also I resonate with any character when they are faced with a tragedy, because it was his sister missing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I could often the children of missing siblings, I guess that's an awkward way of saying it, sometimes get neglected,
Mm-hmm.
because you have here his sister is missing, everybody's looking for her, everybody's trying to figure out what happened, and he's kind of left aside in a sense, and how he feels. I kept wanting to get back into his chapters because he was such an interesting character. And finally, I just wanted to ask, one of the things about Dear Season was a very human story, because it was a very character driven. It's a very, I don't want to say simple in the sense that it's easy to figure out, because that's not what I mean by simple, but it's a very straightforward mystery, I guess is what I should say. Missing girl, what happened? The mentally challenged kid or young man now in town is accused of doing something to her. He can't answer all the questions that are thrown at him. He was such a very, very well done character. And then Alma and her protectiveness of him and saying, no, he couldn't have done that. And all the building up.
You talk about being in a small town, very similar. How did you put all those together into make
anybody? Can you hear me? Hold on, my earbuds.
You went in and out.
I did. Okay, now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Aaron is muted.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was good. I was rambling a bit because I kept my earbuds kept popping, and so I'm like, wait, what am I saying?
If you could just repeat the part of the question.
It was mostly okay. So how Alma was really the other primary character. To me, it was like Alma's story and Milo's story. So Alma, if Milo was you as a child, was Alma more you as a adult? Or do you modeled after anybody else that you might have known to make her such a believable and authentic character?
Well, I like to think I'm funny and I'm a little bit crabby, so she could be me. No, I don't think I had such a model for her, but I've really always loved scrappy women and women who aren't afraid to speak their minds, especially if that's not what might be considered the norm. The other women in the town kind of toe the line a little bit more, and Alma comes as an outsider and has opinions about a lot of things. And I think that she was not modeled on my mom, I wouldn't say that, but my mom was an outsider who came, my whole family was, when we moved to the farm when I was a kid. And I think I was always kind of aware that we hadn't grown up there, or we grew up there, but my parents hadn't lived there the whole lives. So we were kind of outsiders. So some of it came from that. And her relationship with Hal, I think, was just kind of that protectiveness, and how that comes in different ways, not just through parenting.
Yeah, well, he was a very well done character. When I was a teenager, I volunteered to work with mentally impacted, actually more severely emotionally disturbed kids, but just the way that you handled him was so, I hate to use the word authentic, but it just felt real. He felt like a real person to me, and not just a caricature of somebody that is, living in, that's intellectually disabled. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a stereotype. He was so well done, and I really enjoyed the story. So we have a bunch of questions because I want to make sure everybody has a chance. So I'm going to scroll this. So excuse me for 1 minute, so I make sure that. And if anybody has any questions, post it in the chat. So let's see. Okay, how do you decide? We'll go just bang, bang, bang. How do you decide what story to work on next? So first of all, raise your hand. Are you all working on a book right now? Yes? Okay. So how did you decide what story to work on next? Erin.
I am not one of those writers who always has a million ideas. I'm lucky if I have one at a time. So I'm like, whatever that is, I just grab on with everything I have.
Vera, do you have
I usually have like 2 or 3 ideas on the back burner, and one of them just sort of burns more brightly, and then I can usually just kind of like imagine it a lot like a movie before I start writing it down.
and I'm assuming both of you are writing standalone mysteries, thrillers
Yes.
at this point. Okay. Fabian, you're doing the series.
Well, I finished the second book quite a while ago, actually. That was, I think, my 2020 pandemic, right? And I spent 2021 tinkering on other things that weren't panning out. So this year I have not been working on any prose so far. This year I've had other work on my plate that's taken up a chunk of time. So the truth of the matter is that I've always worked on whatever had to be worked on now, because I don't know that I've not had a deadline in my life for 30 years.
Well, I'm very deadline driven too, because they pay you when you turn it in, and that always drives me.
I've learned to get more than half up front.
Well, yeah, they split it up in publishing. Just for people that don't know, usually when you sign a contract, they give you a little bit of money when you sign the contract, a little bit of money when you turn in the book, and then a little bit of money or the rest of it when the book is published. So they kind of spread it out, which is, you don't like it at the time, but then it's probably a good thing, because if you got it all at once, it'd probably be all gone before you're finished with the books. Caitlin, what are you working on now, and how do you decide?
I have like languished and lamented and like started and stopped and so many different like really painful things. And ultimately, I guess the reason that what I'm really working on now feels like the real thing for book 2 is I'm happy and my editors are happy. At least we're all happy enough. And it feels like I have something to say. I think that's really ultimately what kept being a problem for me, is I felt like we could get to a place and I was like, but I don't really have enough to say. And so I was lucky enough to get a 2-book deal. And so that's why we have kind of I have other people that are part of the team already, which is so cool, but we got to make the decision together. Yeah.
That's great. And last but not least, Joanne.
Well, the question is, what am I working on?
What are you working on, and how do you decide what you're working on next?
Well, I'm a very organic writer, and it's sort of like what keeps arriving to me. And I love animals, as maybe is shown by the fact that Rufus was such a central character. And my next book involves actually a cougar attack in Seattle on a surgeon who's doing xenotransplantation. She's just completed a transplant of a pig heart into a human. When I started writing this, that had not yet happened, but now it's, in fact, she was going to be the first on the West Coast, but they were expecting that happen way sooner than I thought it would, but that's okay. And then there's a conspiracy theory that develops around it, involves the east side of my state in Washington state and the west side, which are very different, almost like different countries in terms of how they view their world. And there's a conspiracy theory that develops. And it's, for me, it is, I sit down every day, and that's how I wrote the book that, was nominated, is that I don't know what's going to happen. I just arrive and I say, who's there, right? And what do you have to say to me? And I'm very much about feeling embodied in those characters, and I walk with them on the trails around my town, and then I work on it. So it's fun for me because I'm often surprised.
Well, we're the same, because I also call myself an organic writer, unlike Vera, who, and I do know people that plot like Vera, and they really, really scare me. Andy Gross is one of them. And it just, like, he sits out, how can you not know who killed? I thought, because I'm going to figure it out with my characters. I write police procedurals. If the police knew who did it, then we wouldn't need a justice system. It's like, so I love that. I love the way that you do that. Okay, next question. This time, and by the way, I went out of order mostly because I'm looking at my screen and where you are on my screen. That's how I kind of did. But we'll go to Vera first for this one. how do you, if you do, how do you get the POV voice of a character of a different generation than yours in order to make it authentic?
Yeah, so I was writing a Gen Z person when I am 42, 41. We don't count COVID years. She's such a voicey person, so that like her diction is kind of like unique to her. The thing I had to just kind of like check is that her relationship with like her phone and social media would be completely different than what I would have been when I was her age. And the other characters are just so uniquely themselves. It was more like, not how would I be a Gen Zer? It was like, how would I be Andre? Like, how would this person sound? So it was more focused on that. And then also like my readers of the draft, like some of them were younger. I was just like, is this how Instagram works? So I like wasn't on Instagram at the time, like Snapchat and like that stuff is like not something that's of interest to me. So
see, it's actually a benefit that I have 5 kids. I actually realize I have 2 millennials and 3 Gen Z. I think this is great. Fabian, you have 2 Gen Z millennials.
I have a hard time answering it because I don't know that I've ever written a character my age. I've written characters that are younger than me or older than me, often at the same exact time. The struggle I have now is that if I'm writing a character significantly younger than me, like I did in the book at this point, they weren't younger than me when I came up with the characters and the idea. It's harder for me to not impart my own frame of reference onto them, either culturally or historically, their interests in entertainment or their knowledge of cultural anecdotes. So I realize often that I try to find a way to cheat, and like with Andy in Suburban Dicks, she grew up in a household where a father just sold black market crap. That was what he did. So there were always like VHS tapes and Betamax tapes and eventually CDs when she was growing up in her apartment constantly. So she has a little more of a frame of reference, culturally speaking, in terms of entertainment stuff than a normal 34-year-old would be expected to have. And that's just me cheating because I just, I can make a Happy Days joke and 90% of the people I'm telling it to aren't going to get it, and that's when you start to realize how old you're getting. So I really, the honest answer is I just try to cheat my way through it.
Great. Caitlin, what about you? Well, you're pretty much the age of your characters.
I roughly am, yeah. So I'm in my 30s and the husband and wife are in their 30s. The younger brother is in his 20s, but I have teenage niece and nephew, and I worked with teenagers. I was a lawyer for juvenile defense. And so that was pretty easy for me. And then the older detective, I think kind of what other people have said already, in the sense of just knowing people and paying attention. And I know plenty of people that were Detective Rice's age. And so I think that that's just kind of how you end up writing it. And then, like Vera said, the character ends up just taking on their own personality and voice, and you're not even really thinking about generation anymore. You just know the character and this is how they're going to talk in this scene.
And Erin, that's exactly what you were saying with your story about how the characters just take over. Milo took over and Alma took over when you're in her voice.
Yeah. And I don't think about age so much. That's interesting. It's an interesting question. I think that, the character is the age that they are. And I haven't really thought about that much, but I'm going to now and get paranoid that I've screwed it up all this time, but thank you.
No, you didn't screw it up.
That.
Hey, Caitlin, so you, do you have anything to add about being in someone, especially Isaac, because he's a man, you're not? How did you put yourself in his shoes to make him so authentic?
You mean,
or did I say
Caitlin?
I'm sorry, I meant Joanne.
I was going to say, I'm not sure.
I was saying Isaac, and I was looking at Joanne, and I said Caitlin, and I'm sorry. Like I said, I have 5 kids. I can't keep their names straight. I can't keep you guys straight either. Joanne.
Okay. Well, for me, these people just arrived. I mean, literally, like, Isaac had a chair in my office and he would sit there, and some days he would not talk to me at all. He was being very Quakerish and quiet and reflective. And I would just be like, okay, well, I'm going to write on these other things until you show up. And I live in a small town. I have a dog, as you can imagine, and I walk all around the trails. And I would always pick a character to go with me. And I wouldn't try to talk to them. They would just be by my side. And I maybe would have some question in my head. And at some point, they will start talking to me. It's a very, very organic and really fun process, because in what comes after, I do write in the first person voice of a 50-year-old Quaker man. And I also write in the first person voice of a 16-year-old killer. And I really resisted writing in the voice of Jonah, the killer, in my book, thinking like, well, I've never been a 16-year-old boy, but he was quite insistent. And I just thought, well, what the hell? He keeps showing up. He keeps having something to say. So I'm just going to write it. So it is a very, for me, super fun and organic way of finding out what the story is. To me, it always felt like the story existed. And it was almost like I was pulling it up out of the water and kind of with some of the words run and not necessarily in order, but it was all there. Like it almost like was a discovery process of something that existed.
And that's what editing is for. You get it all down and then you can go back and make it all sound better. Now, we have a question here about the publishing process. So Fabian started this conversation by saying that he came up with this idea 25 years ago. So why don't you talk about 2017, you finished this book, and
17, I started the book at the end of 2017.
Okay, started the book. Finally, after 25 years.
To try my best to make too long a story short, I was at New York Comic Con, in Artist Alley, and I have a table booth set up like I do at a lot of conventions, and I'm signing autographs. And a guy who was online for an autograph asks me if I know someone that he's a coworker of, and it's a guy I worked with when I got out of college in 1983 at Berkeley Publishing, because that's where I worked when I first got out of college. And I said, oh, yeah, of course I know John, yeah. And I find out that he's an editor at St. Martin's, and he's a big comic book fan. And I just ironically just go, well, that's funny, because 2 weeks ago, I just started breaking down a novel that I plan once and for all to finish. And all he said, just out of banter, all he said was, well, when you're done, I'd be happy to take a look at it. And that was it. And then he left, and I had other people in line. I'm signing autographs. But in the back of my mind, while I was writing, I always thought, I don't have an agent, and I got to get an agent. I don't have a publishing, I don't have many publishing contacts in book publishing. So I have to figure out how to get some of those. But at least I know there's one editor at one company who said he'll take a look at the manuscript. So I got that at least as an end game to try to have someone look at it. But as it turns out, from a result of business contacts, I met an agent at UTA who was incredibly interested in the basic premise of Suburban Dicks, and said that he'd be willing to have his team look at it when I was done. And I wasn't done at that point yet. I was in the rewriting phase. I wrote it all through 2018 and started I hired an editor to edit it. And then I started rewriting, and I had to cut a lot out of it because I overwrote like crazy. And the UTA read it. He had a whole team of people read it. They came back with notes. I did rewrites based on those notes. That took me through the end of 2019 when the manuscript. We got to a point where I just said, I can't cut anymore. I can't rewrite anymore. This is more work than on anything than I've ever done in my life. I'm done. I'm old. And they said, all right, and they took it out. So the process for me was having an end game helped, because otherwise I might have created excuses not to finish. And then having an agent express interest in the completed manuscript really put me over the hump, because that was rewrite time, and I don't like rewriting. Although now I love it. In prose, I now love rewriting. I never liked rewriting in anything else I've ever written. So it helped a lot in that capacity to have people that were kind of at the end of the road waiting. And again, like I said, I'm pretty deadline driven because I've always had to be. So that created an artificial deadline in my head. I have people waiting to look at it, so I have to
Have to get
move
it done.
towards
Yeah.
and get it done. Yeah.
Yeah, I like deadlines too. Okay, we only have a few more minutes, so I want everybody to, because we did have 2 people ask questions about the publication process. So we're going to go, Joanne, did you find an agent and how did you go through your publication process? Oh, unmute you.
Actually, I was pretty bold. I sent it out. I got a call back from my agent, Susan Gollum at Writer's House, and she wanted to talk to me. And I mean, I will be honest, that talk was pretty much about everything that was wrong with my book, right? And so I was like, well, if I worked on those things, would you be interested? And she goes, well, I certainly would not have spent an hour of my very precious time if I wasn't interested. And so I go, oh, okay, so great. So I worked on it, and then I happened to be in New York, and I happened to meet her, and I just loved her, and she's an amazing agent, and so it just worked out. And then of course she helped me rethink at where she felt it needed more momentum. She's a wonderful agent that was really pivotal to me getting it. And so that part was the hard part. I mean, once she got it in her hands, ready to go and put it out into the world, she's
Writer's House is very good.
Yeah, the publishers responded, so that was wonderful.
Great. Erin, what about you?
Yeah, I tried to get an agent with deer season and queried quite a few people, and it just didn't happen. I think that they thought it was going to be a really quiet book, and so that didn't go so well. But I had a great relationship with Nebraska Press, so I went back and asked if they might be interested, and I was just thrilled to bits that they were. So,
well, they obviously knew what a good book was.
Well, thank you.
Caitlin, what about you?
I cold queried my agent, and so I did one round of queries. I only got one person asking to read the manuscript, and she gave me a revise and resubmit. So it's basically a really great kind of rejection where she says, I don't want to rep you, but if you made XYZ changes, I'd want to read it again. And I thought they were awesome. So I stopped querying people. I did her changes. And then the short version is I queried some more people, and the agent that I ended up going with moved super swiftly. And I just felt like she had a really clear plan for what she was going to do. But the part that you have control over if you're writing and interested is that initial stage of like writing the query letter, reading everything you can online about them, showing the query letter to people and asking them if they can tell you like in a sentence what the book is about. Because a lot of times you know the book so well that your query has no stakes in it and you think you've told all the stakes. And so all of that work there, it's hard, but it's so worth it once you do it. And so anyway, yeah, that's my.
Well, I think yours is a very traditional story because I know
Yeah.
I got rejected like 50 times before I got an agent. So,
Right.
but it's just getting that one that says, I like your voice and I think we can make something happen. Vera.
Yeah. And I was
I'm
just
sorry.
gonna say
No, go.
Really quickly, just for anyone out there who's doing it, I got rejected by someone the day my agent sold it. So she called me and said, like, I got you this incredible, sexy book deal. This is the most exciting day of your life. And I got an email from someone being like, pass. And I was like, okay. So it's just so subjective. Please don't take it personally if you get rejected.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Vera, what about you? What was your publication story?
This is the third book that I queried. So I was actually rejected by hundreds of agents before I got picked up for this one. And we went out for submission at the beginning of the pandemic, actually. And it got snatched up like right away. And then we sold the UK rights and we sold the film rights. And now agents who rejected the query are saying they love the book. Just like, okay, whatever. So a lot of persistence and like having a good sense of like how the publishing world works certainly helps.
Yeah, and I think it's important having the persistence because the book I sold was my 5th manuscript. I didn't sell my first 4 books, but I don't consider that a failure because each book I learned. And I think anybody here that's listening to this as an aspiring writer, Vera, she sold her third book and it's now an Edgar nominee. It took me 5 books to sell and I hit the New York Times list. So it just takes learning from your process, becoming better, and just keep going out there. Just believe in yourself and keep going out there. Now, I think that is it on the questions that we have. And I just want to say that on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, if you're not watching baseball, because it is baseball season, my favorite thing, if you're not watching baseball, please join us for a conversation with the nominees for Best Fact Crime. And you can go to the website, edgars.com or mysterywriters.com to find out more information about the Edgar Awards on April 28th, which will be live streamed, or to find out about other future and past panels just like this. So you can go again, it'll be posted in the YouTube channel and probably on Facebook, where you can go and watch the future panels or the past panels, and also where you can watch the Edgar Awards on April 28th. And good luck to all of you. I'm so excited for each and every one of you. And like I said at the very beginning, anybody who's listening to this, please go out, buy these books and read them.